Let's just jump off right now. So welcome aboard. Thanks for joining. My name is Scott, and I am a recruiting, I want to say dinosaur, because I've been in the recruiting industry for over 3 decades, a long time. But I am privileged to have a guest with me, a friend with me, someone I know well, but honestly, I don't think I know him well enough. Manny Rodriguez, welcome aboard. Manny is, let me give you a little background on Manny. And if you don't know Manny, go to his LinkedIn profile. But he's somebody I've known for many years. And I just realized just before we started the conversation that I've not met Manny in person. Now that may be a shock to a lot of people because I trust Manny. He's a true professional, but I work globally. I'm in the recruiting business. I deal with thousands of people. I deal with a lot of people and don't have the privilege to meet everybody in person. Now, Manny is somebody I think I feel like I've met you, Manny. Even though I don't think we've officially even shaken hands.
Correct.
We've worked together, but you are a veteran in the sales industry, and am I correct in saying you're kind of a connoisseur of fine adult beverages? Is that right?
That is also factual, although I don't have any in my office today. Yeah, that's true as well.
None showing on the desk right now.
Correct.
They're out of sight. So if you want to go ahead, I mean, I think you're a sales superstar. Like you are that guy that makes sincere connections. You are the example of really how to do things from a sales perspective, from an interview perspective. I mean, you're knowledgeable, you're adaptable, you are resilient. You've been through a lot of garbage like many other sales reps. But the key is you've been resilient through all of this. And you're the relationship builder. So go ahead and add on to the fine points that, or non-fine points that I've said about you, and introduce yourself here today, Manny.
Sure. Quick introduction. My name is Manny Rodriguez. I'm based in Denver, Colorado. I've been here 27 years, coming up in December via New York City. I cut my sales teeth in Manhattan, New York, selling copiers for Xerox. Coincidentally, that was my dad's first sales job in New York City in the 60s as well. And my brother actually followed my dad's footsteps in Detroit right out of undergrad for himself. So corporate sales for 32 plus years, medical for the last 22 plus with a focus. Half of that was in plastic surgery and dermatology lasers, which is how Scott and I actually met. Scott placed me back in 2011 with a company. And I actually realized this morning when I was driving my fiance, Nicole, to the airport, that Scott is indirectly responsible for that introduction because the company he placed me with is the company that I started calling on that particular plastic surgeon's account with. And when I met Nicole back in, 2011. So Scott, thank you. I appreciate that very much. I've worked in big corporate, in medical, GE Healthcare, Becton Dickinson, and currently with Fresenius Kabi covering a large geography. And I learned a long time ago, primarily from my dad, that sales is really all relationships. It's how do you relate to people? How do you understand what their personal wins are? And all of those sales skills translate to making genuine connections, including in the interview process, right? Scott mentioned that we've never met in person. We've been close crossing paths. I was on a motorcycle trip in New Mexico one summer. Scott was in Southern California on one of his conversion van or camping van trips. We couldn't quite make it work, but we've stayed in touch for 13 years now, I believe it is, Scott. So, being able to make those connections, find a way to have a genuine interest in not only what the other individual wants, but how you fit in within their organization, I think is a big driver for interview success.
And that's 100%. Like this, everything that we talk about, Manny, is about connecting, sincere connection with the person that you're talking to, whether it be sales or interviewing. And I didn't realize first of all, I'm learning about you as you talk, meaning I didn't know your dad was a copier sales rep in New York. I didn't know that. My dad sold calculators
Okay.
in upstate New York. He was a calculator salesman before the copier industry really kicked in. And if you did that in the city, first of all, anybody that sells copiers is, boy, oh boy, that is tough work. Like, that is not easy. You get the shit beat out of you every day. And especially in the city where they're not going to hold back on you. They're going to let you have it.
It's a great training ground. And another quick small world story about, following in my dad's footsteps. The HR director who I met with on my first day at Xerox in New York City hired my father in 1965. When I sat down with her, she said to me, she was a heavy smoker back in the early 90s. You could still sort of smoke in your office if you kept the door closed.
Yep.
Her name was Julia, and she looked across the desk at me and in her New York accent and her smoker's rasp says, "Manny, why didn't you tell me who your father was last summer when you interviewed? We had a hiring freeze." And I said to her, well, I wanted to get the job on my own merits. I wanted to make sure, I was the right fit and the right candidate. And she goes, "I hired your father in 1965. I could have made an exception." And it was stunning that the woman who brought me on board brought my dad on board 28 years earlier in 1965. I mean, small world.
Unbelievable, Manny. Like, it's in the genetics, obviously. Like, if you have the ability to do that, your dad had the ability to do that. And you obviously saw all of the chaos your dad went through and how tough it was. And you were up to that challenge. Like, that didn't scare you away. And I'm sure he taught you a lot of great things. Like, he gave you, my father was in the recruiting industry. Well, brought me into the recruiting industry, very similar to your background. My dad was in sales, started in the recruiting industry in the early 70s, brought me into the recruiting industry in 1993. And I learned a lot growing up in that industry. I saw what he did, how he did, and I worked summers for him in the industry when I was younger. So I was able to pick up on things, but I don't think I had the intensity of what I know about the copier industry. That intense sales battle that's out there. I'm sure you learned a lot of things from your dad, and I'm sure obviously on the ground you were able to put those into practice. One thing though, that copier sales reps that I have found in my experience, copier sales reps are great training ground, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that I've seen is they can't transition into the relationship side. They're good at the transactional side sometimes. Sometimes they're very cutthroat, and that sometimes that's a little bit difficult to transition into the relationship side of things. And before we jump into that aspect here, because I think that's critically important, like relationships within sales. But you mentioned something, and you mentioned a minute before we jumped on this LinkedIn Live about how coincidentally you met your fiance through the job that I placed. And I just want to publicly say you're welcome for me creating your life as good as you did. And I'm joking.
I appreciate that. It's funny though that I just put that connection together this morning because I was driving her to the airport. She's flying to Texas for meetings, and she said she was going to try to hop on, but she's airborne right now, so she might not be able to make it. And all of a sudden it clicked, right? That connection of Scott put me at Syneron Candela. I walked into that plastic surgeon's office, and as they say, the rest is history. So
That is unbelievable. And I'm glad, like, my job is being in the recruiting industry is to help make that marriage between the candidate and the hiring manager and the company happen.
Right.
And, you know, it's tough to read both sides, but to really make a marriage in the end, you know, I don't have a lot of those. I'm sure I have a few if I dug deep, but that is a great story. You're like a walking billboard for me. Like,
I appreciate
seriously.
Well, you're welcome. So anyway, enough about us. Let's start talking about things that are going to help some other folks.
Absolutely. And before we jump into this, so you mentioned Xerox.
Mhm.
So Steve Bandershak is the CEO of Xerox. I worked with him on another project.
No
One
kidding.
day, here's what I'm going to promise you. I'm going to beat up Steve, who doesn't like to do many public events. I'm going to have a discussion between me, you, and Steve on LinkedIn Live. So I'm going to
I would
work
love it.
towards that. Like
And,
Steve's another great guy.
and my brother, his first full year with Xerox in Detroit, was their number one rep in the state. So we should drag him into the
Oh my
conversation
goodness.
too.
Yeah, yeah. The more the merrier. Yes. And hopefully there's some connection where I have helped your brother get the right spouse at some point, but we'll work towards that. So let's enough beratement and joking. Let's just kind of jump into really how does sales and job hunting kind of correlate? Like, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this. And anybody has questions, feel free to jump in, or if you want to add a comment, go ahead and jump in. But Manny, you are the epitome of relationships and sales. But give me your 2 cents on this.
So, a sales manager that I worked for one of the years that I made President's Club when I was selling lasers for a company called Qterra. Uh, After I knew I had won it, he called me and he said, "Manny, why do you think you had such a great year last year?" And I closed deals, I collaborated. You know, you say all the things you're supposed to say. And his name was Al Santos. I'm still friends with him. I'm sure you're surprised, right? And he said to me, he said, "You did a great job of disqualifying people that were just kicking tires, people that really weren't ready to buy." And, you know, you talk about how does sales correlate to interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big part of it is, you know, recruiters reach out all the time on LinkedIn. And in fact, I got one this morning, and it wasn't my space. It was wound care, nothing I'm interested in. Plus, I'm happy at my current role and I'm doing well, coming off a President's Club run last year and a lot of good things in the funnel for late this year and early next year. But, you know, so many aspects of sales. Don't spend time talking to people who are not buying what you are selling. Don't talk to people who don't need problems solved that you can solve for them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you cast a wide net looking for job opportunities that might be a good fit. And we all only have so much bandwidth, right? Typically, when we're job hunting, we have an existing job. In many cases, we like it. But if we're being honest, most people look for a job because they're not happy either with the money or who they report to. I think you had a podcast on, you know, people quit jobs because of managers, not because of the job. And I think if you take all those things into account from a sales perspective, it narrows the funnel down to real opportunities. Hey, these 2 or 3 companies, you know, might be a really good fit for me. I could definitely be a good fit for them. You know, a real life situation when you contacted me to work for Syneron Candela, I had already been in the laser industry before.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that industry like the back of my hand. I still had a ton of relationships with surgeons, with dermatologists, with plastic surgeons. And I said to myself, all right, number one, it's a good fit. Number two, it's a really good company that I want to work for. And you and I developed a rapport very quickly. And I thought to myself, all right, now I have an advocate, right? Somebody at an account who is going to go to bat for my solution. Scott, you were going to go to bat for me with Syneron Candela. And so, you know, and again, I've been doing it a long time, over 3 decades. It's all kind of second nature how you move things through the process, but also being willing to say no to opportunities that just aren't a good fit. People can tell if you're desperate. People can tell if you're not a good fit and you're making things up and you're trying to shoehorn yourself into a place where maybe you wouldn't have the most success. So I really think sales skills translate to interview skills very naturally. And what you're selling is you're selling your ability to do the job. You're selling your ability to take care of customers, and you're selling your ability to fit in with the sales team. Collaboration is one of those big words that gets thrown around in business constantly, but that's really what it is. If you're a salesperson, no salesman or saleswoman does it alone ever. If they do, they're usually out within 12 to 18 months, because mavericks don't make it in sales long term, right? And the same holds true with the interview process. If you're cocky, if you act like, yep, I can do this job all by myself, there's somebody else coming in behind you who's more of a team player.
Agreed. Like, one thing you mentioned, and I say this all the time, Manny, is in the interview, you are the product and you're the salesman. You're wearing two hats there.
Correct.
And for many, many years, for 20 years, I placed sales reps with companies. And even the best sales rep has a problem with that. Like, they don't understand the two roles that they have. And it gets more difficult with moving out of sales. For example, if you're a programmer, if you're something outside of sales, you have a hard time trying to sell yourself to a company, because that's what you're doing in an interview. The question that I have for you, though, is it's very similar selling a product in sales and pitching yourself, but it's also a very difficult thing. My guess is when you walk into a potential customer, you have a pitch, a compelling story that you want to deliver to that customer. How do you craft that? How do you craft that and boil that down to how can somebody craft a compelling story to sell themselves?
So it's a great question. And we actually had sales training at my current company on this last year. It's about telling a story, and in that story, providing an insight, something of value that the person you're speaking with may not know. And by you bringing it up, they're going to be curious and want to know more about it. So how do we move that to the interview process? And whether you're a salesperson or not, if you're an engineer, if you're a project manager, if you're a nurse, bring something to the table that makes the person you're talking to say, gosh, I never thought of that. This woman, this man is really sharp. I want to hear more. Mm-hmm. So you would bring some sort of an insight to the table about the industry you're looking at going into, an insight of, problems that you're seeing in your current role. Let's say it's the same industry, but you're interviewing to go to another company. Problems you're seeing in your current role that you brought to a customer's attention that they didn't even know about. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, the person that is across the desk or across the Zoom call from you sort of perks up, sits up in their chair, leans toward the camera because they want to learn more. So the insight makes it about their company and about their business. And if you make your interview about what you are going to do for them, it sets you apart from 90% of the candidates. People that just sit there and talk about themselves, you can see the manager checking their clock, checking their watch, the HR person, looking at the clock on the bottom of the computer on the Zoom call. And at the bottom of the hour when your half hour is up, everything's up. So I think that's the best way to do it, Scott, is to provide some sort of an insight about how you can help their organization and how you can help their customer's customer. Real quick, real life story on that. A couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine's daughter, I am mentoring her as she begins her sales career with a very large company out of Chicago. I won't name the company. and she's an internal development rep. So she's calling on existing clients, trying to expand the portfolio. So it's a friendly-ish, warm call. And she was sharing with me a few weeks ago, she was saying to me, Manny, like, I'm kind of getting nowhere. I call and I do my pitch, and gosh, people are friendly, but like, we're not interested. We don't have time.
Mm-hmm.
I said to her, I said, listen, let's not make it about your pitch. Find a small insight that you can provide to them that you did for another customer, that your company did for another customer. And when you call and you say, hey, Scott, I know you're a current customer of ours. We've worked with other current customers to solve this problem that they didn't even really know they had, or this way to increase revenue by X% that they weren't aware of. And gosh, I'm hoping you can have, 15 minutes to talk with one of our account executives. I can set up that appointment with you to get more details. She called me a week later and said, my cold calling has changed completely. People want to talk to me. People are more interested than they were just 2 weeks ago. So she flipped it to make it about them versus about herself.
100%. And I tell people this all the time. The old book, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yep.
Show sincere interest in the other person.
Yep.
And I always am listening to podcasts and different things on advice and how to sell, how to win people over. And I wrote this down because I listened to this last night and I wanted to scream. And I switched screens, so hopefully you can still see me here. But so this bad advice was, the topic was how to win over people. And the speaker said that oftentimes in order to know someone, they have to know you first. So tell them about you and your interests.
Terrible idea.
Terrible idea. Like, I just can't believe how bad that idea is. Like, that goes against how to win friends and influence people. I would say, what's the most important thing to anybody? What's the one most important thing? Because when I interview people, I want to find out what motivates them.
Mm-hmm.
But the core with anyone, the key, and as you learn with dealing with people, the key to anybody is themselves. Like, they're the most important person. What is more important than anything? It's just themselves. So your job as a sales rep, as an interviewer, is really getting to know that person and giving them solutions that apply to them. Not about you. This isn't about me. This isn't about what I want to do or what I say. It's how are they thinking? So we've talked about this before, but the key is tailoring your message, your interview message, or your sales pitch to them. Like, it's understanding their needs. And I had the opportunity to use some technology and analyze you, Manny. Okay. We'll share that in another discussion. But one of the things that it said was relationship building. And from a sincere standpoint, Manny has the ability to kind of dig in and sincerely understand other people. And one of your accolades that somebody wrote about you is to this extent. And I think it was a couple of this, that you could build relationships and you got to know their needs and their interest and their people, their problems. So the question is, what's your secret? Because this applies to sales and interviews.
Mm-hmm.
How do you understand the customer needs?
I mean, it's not a big secret, right? It's asking questions, it's listening, and it's taking each question to the next step. It's.
But that is a secret, Manny. So listening.
It's not, though. Right? From the perspective of.
Listening is a big secret, and most people don't do it. We're worried. Most people are worried about the next question.
True.
And they're not sincerely listening. And one thing that, like him or not like him, okay, it doesn't matter here, but I've been watching Elon Musk and his mannerisms. He listens to the person asking him a question. He listens, and he doesn't have the reply made. So I know you think it's not a secret, but I want you to emphasize the importance of sincerely listening and asking questions.
So I think the key is so let's assume you are a good listener for this conversation moving forward. And when you're asking the questions and it's going through the filter in your brain, right? Figuring out what aspects of that answer you can apply yourself to in the interview. What is unique about Scott Statson, or what is unique about Manny Rodriguez's ability, or anybody who's interviewing? What is unique about how you can solve the problem they're presenting to you, or the win of the hiring manager, the win that they're looking for? The last territory, the rep didn't really work that hard. The last territory, the rep was more worried about leaving at 3 o'clock to go play golf every day during the summer. Whatever the case may be, listening to understand what that win is, or listening to understand, again, as you filter it in your brain, listening to understand what key pieces of those problems you can solve in a unique way, right? There are thousands and thousands and thousands of sales reps across the country. But when you're in an interview, what can you do in that geography with that product and with their solutions that probably nobody else can? And I think that's the key, is to really focus on what problem are we solving for them, for the person who's interviewing you. I'm solving a problem for him or her. And an example was when you and I worked together, you wanted to place a top quality rep that had experience and that was motivated to go sell out in the field, right? So I knew that. I made sure I communicated with you even when we didn't have anything on the schedule. Hey, Scott, checking in, just a reminder. These are the 3 key points as to why I think I'm a good fit for this organization. And here's why it will help them grow their revenue and grow their business and increase their prestige in the market, meaning they're well thought of in my territory. And again, it goes back to, that was a win for you, and that was a win for the hiring manager at that company. And ultimately, I was there for a bit of time, and I had some good success, and I had repeat customers when I was with other laser companies who bought from me. And I delivered on what I committed to because I understood the problem that they were looking to solve.
Agreed, Manny. Like, first of all, you made me look good. Okay. That's why we're here today. And that's why I hunted you down.
Right.
But I also think questions are important. Listening is important. But I like to dig deeper on these sometimes.
Sure.
From a psychology standpoint. I think the importance of the questions is, first of all, to show that you understand and relate to them. You understand their business. It shows you've done your homework.
Correct.
But the key, I think, in asking questions, okay, and then the way you reply to those questions is a whole nother subject. But the asking questions part shows your homework, but the bottom line psychology core of this is really to build rapport. Those questions help you build rapport, because it's not, you don't come in with a generic list of questions. You come in with questions that are very specific and hit them to build rapport. How do you build rapport with your questions? That's the key, because people hire people that they like, and people buy from people that they like. Sometimes there's nuances to that, but the bottom line is you ask questions to build rapport. Yes, you want to find out answers, and it's critical to identify their challenges and their needs, so you can follow up with digging deeper and giving them solutions to those. But you want to build rapport. And you seem to have an expertise and specialty in building rapport. Any secrets that you don't think are secrets? Anything that you can share?
I mean, I've always been inquisitive ever since I was a kid. I like to ask questions. I've liked to learn about other people. Some of my close friends also know that there are people I have no interest in talking to. And that kind of goes back to the initial comment we talked about earlier about, disqualifying opportunities that are not of interest. Don't talk to a company that you have zero desire to work for. Don't waste their time, but more importantly, don't waste your own time. Find something that's of interest to you, and when you're building rapport with those questions and answers, it shows you're legitimately interested. Like you said, it shows you've done your homework. Don't ask questions that you can find the answer to on the internet. Ask questions that relate to those facts. Ask questions that show the people you're speaking with that you understand that their business is bigger than selling copiers. It's solving office problems, it's solving patient needs, whatever the case may be. So, back to your question, I've just always been inquisitive. The older I get, the less I kind of like small talk at parties and stuff like that. But people I know really well, like you and I talked for an hour and a half 2 weeks ago, and maybe 20 minutes of it was prep for this call. It was, hey, tell me about the new things you have going on. We were talking about kids. We were talking about motorcycle trips. We were talking about trips overseas this year. All those things they're of interest to me because I'm interested in you. So,
wow, hour and a half. I didn't think it was that long, Manny. My apologies.
We talked for an hour and a half. That's okay.
Wow. Well, I think you're right. Being inquisitive is extremely important. Now, in the how to win friends and influence people, a couple things I disagree with you on. Okay, are you ready?
Sure.
So that going to an interview that you're not going to have an interest in, as a recruiter, I like to send people to interviews, and most people have, a mindset of I'm not going to like that company because they bought one bad product or they read a bad review. I don't think people can know everything about an organization until they dig in there and get to know. The only way you'll get to know whether you like the hiring manager, whoever it is, or the company is by talking to them. And I think that's a good opportunity. If you're not interested in an organization, go to the interview so you can learn more. And obviously most people need practice on their interviews.
Mm-hmm.
They need to be put in situations that they're uncomfortable to practice. And I always tell candidates, okay, this may not be your first choice, but I want you to go in there and knock your interview out of the ballpark where they're begging to hire you. That's your goal here. I want you to practice your interview. So when we do put you in front of that A player, when I put you in front of that A company, you already have that battle scar. You understand how questions are asked and how to be thrown off your game and come back. Because most people don't. They don't have that experience. They don't have that stamina. So I think going to an interview that you're not 100% on or not confident in or maybe not have an interest in is actually a good thing to do. It's experience. But it also is enlightening. It gives you more insight into a company than you would just have if you read something on the internet or read a review. So there I disagree a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like how to win friends and influence people, I force myself to talk to people and ask them questions because I walk into a situation and I'm not interested in certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, the older I get, the more I go, I don't give a shit about this. Like, right. And it's obvious. I have to force myself into when my kids were younger, and I tell this story about playing a game. It's about playing the game. So after winning how to win friends and influence people, my goal was to sincerely find something of genuine interest in the other person that I could ask a question about, no matter where they were, cashier at a grocery store, wherever they were, because it would help me understand the psychology of people, but it would also improve their day. Because when you ask people about themselves, their face perks up. Like even the most grumpy person. I tell this story about a restaurant we went to that it was the meanest owner in the world. She ran this Asian restaurant and she was the meanest thing. And I remember my son, Nick, when he was a little kid, he said, Dad, play the game with her. Play the game with her. And I'm like, okay, that's a good idea. Like usually she's mean. We don't say anything. We walk, order her food, and she literally will yell at you to get out. Like leave, like go. I have other customer, get out. Like she was that mean. So I remember one day when he told me that, I found a picture on her little desk as we're walking in, and it was a little kid, and it was in New York City, and we're in Michigan. And as we're sitting down, I said, I saw the picture on your desk. Is that your son? Does he live in New York? The lights in her eyes totally changed, Manny. I was sincerely interested in that. It changed. She started telling me about her grandson and her son and how they moved to New York and da 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 da. She paid attention. She talked to me instead of screaming commands. And I remember going back to that restaurant after having a conversation with her, that showing sincere interest. Over a year later, I walked in the restaurant. She ignored every customer she had. This was a busy place, and ran right to me and sat me and my family down and stayed there. She was the person putting people in their seats. She stayed there and talked to me to the point I was embarrassed. And it taught me a really, really good lesson that people are the most important part of this. And I think from an interview standpoint, from a sales standpoint, it's a good example to show sincere interest in other people. Even if we walk around grumpy, like I do all the time, and not interested in other people, it helps them. And it helps me because it makes me feel better that I've improved their day. And they will remember you. This woman remembered me over a year and a half later. And it's not uncommon. This has happened to me many times. So I tell people, first of all, read How to Win Friends and Influence People, listen to the audiobook. It'll change the way you perceive things and the way you behave. And I have to force myself into that mode because I'm traditionally move on from one thing to another and be very blunt. And I care about myself and I don't care about the other side. But I think you're a great example, Manny, of how to really build true relationships, sincere relationships, in building true deep rapport by, as you said, kind of filtering through the sales nonsense. Okay. You'll find out about people. And even when my family and we go to I have to go to dinner with my wife's friends. And I complain the entire time going there. And she just says, just play your game when you're there. Well, she knows my game is to kind of get people interested. And I do that. And I end up making friends at these things. And you find out, and the people have in the bottom line, I find out, but they have a great time. They've enjoyed the conversation. And most of the time I haven't asked anything. I've asked a couple questions and I just listen. And then I'll play on that. And from an intrigue, or like you said, you're inquisitive as a kid, I can find out anything. And just like a sales presentation or an interview, you can ask anything, but you have to build that rapport right away. If you ask the right questions, you get them to talk, you have the trust. You have been able in your career, Manny, and I'll share this technology tool that I used. It analyzed you, and I'm like, how the heck does it know Manny this well? It analyzed you as somebody that can build rapport and trust and then go out and kill it from the workplace standpoint. But I want to ask you, what are a couple secrets that you have that may not be secrets? When you filter through these customers, like you said earlier, that are non-buying or a waste of time, which is probably a lot of them. How do you, and I know you don't just slam the door on them, okay? Right. Knowing you, how do you tell them no or walk away? How do you slam that door with building rapport?
I think it becomes a matter of telling somebody. You don't tell somebody no, you don't slam the door. You say yes if, right? Yes if. gosh, we can't do that for you right now, but we can. There's the yes, if these other things happen, if your contract has expired, if we get the buy-in of the nurses, if we get the buy-in of the pharmacies in your hospital system. And I'm just making up, an example, but don't slam the door. Say yes if. I'll give you another great real life example. I've been with my current company 2.5 years. And in 2021, I got a call from a recruiter early in the year for a sales manager role to lead a team in the IV therapy and infusion space. And I knew I wasn't qualified because I had not sold that product prior. A division of a company I worked for prior had sold those products. But I said, please call me when they start to hire the sales reps. A year later, I get a phone call, same recruiter, Manny, they're hiring sales reps. And we go through the thing, and I said, my first interview was set up, and the recruiter, who's from Boston, who I've gotten along great with over the years, I said, who is the hiring manager? And the name he gives me is of a gentleman that I used to work with when I was at Becton Dickinson. And ultimately, I wound up getting the job offer. So it wasn't, I'm not interested in the company. The role wasn't a great fit. But yes, if they're hiring sales reps, call me a year later. I was hired by somebody who used to be a major accounts rep, and he and I used to work our business development track together, and he brought me on board. And it was yes if, right? It wasn't like, get lost, I don't know enough to do this job. I didn't know enough how to lead a team selling that stuff, but I knew for sure I could sell it. And here I am 2.5 years later.
That's interesting. Like the yes if, I've never heard it broken down that way. Like that is a great secret. That's a good trade secret. That I like that. Like I'm just taking a note. Yes if. There are a lot of little things like that, Manny, that can make a huge difference. Like the yes if. Love it.
You have kids. I know most of them are grown now. And you negotiated with kids. You probably did yes if, and you don't even realize it. Dad, I want ice cream. Well, finish your dinner first. Yes, you can have ice cream if you finish your dinner first. You've been doing yes if your whole life.
Yeah, I guess you're right. But sometimes with kids, it's easier to just say no.
That's also true.
Because if you open
Dad said so.
If you open the door, you're just going to get berated nonstop.
Yeah, you're negotiating with insurgents. So
you really are. And we can do another one on negotiating. That's a topic I love, on negotiation.
Same.
Because when you mention yes if, it reminds me of when you're negotiating, when you're interviewing, or when you're asking negotiating questions. Ask the what, never ask the why, because why is the defensive word. If you ask somebody why, they're immediately on the defense, and you're trying to build rapport. Somebody, Tim just asked, what did he ask here? Great salesperson, have the sincere interest of prospect. Can't fake that. Be a successful salesperson. The truth is, once you listen and play this game, you'll become a more sincere person. And that's why yes, I totally agree. I totally agree, Tim. Like great idea. Like it is, there are all these things that you learn through experience. Like when you get beat up, it's about learning. Even though, Manny, you've got many years in this industry, I'm sure you're still learning techniques and tactics and adapting. That's another thing that the AI tool told me. You're adaptive. And I'm like, that guy's not adaptive.
With certain things, I agree. But at work, you have to be. You're not going to make any money. You're not going to sell anything. You're not going to get that job. You're not going to move anything forward professionally if you can't adapt to situations.
Agreed.
Whether it's a customer who's really upset, whether it's a customer who you just need to stop emailing and pick up the phone, adapt the conversation, take the lack of emotion or the lack of, understanding out of email, because email is so sanitized.
Yep.
Pick up the phone and you can hear the frustration in their voice, or you can hear the happiness in their voice. Yeah, absolutely. Being adaptive is huge. Selling in New York City taught me that at an early age. I feel really fortunate. There are a lot of copier salesmen out there in the world not selling copiers anymore that are grateful for getting beat up in whatever territory they sold, and being able to be adaptive, be resilient, ask those questions where your brain can start to filter for those tidbits of information. How do you solve that problem for the customer?
Yeah, Manny, great lesson. Like, that is a great summary for all of this. And one thing I say is, how does this apply to anybody? And you mentioned like the training that you had in New York City, like how you got beat up. When I manage teams, there are people that have issues, and there's always things that we have on our plate that are issues. And I used to be a procrastinator. I like to put things off, never do them, never taught and it finally hit me. I finally learned somehow to just take care of that. I made lists and put lists together. But what you said is sincerely applicable to this. In anything that we do, what's your toughest thing? What's the most difficult problem you have on your desk? And for me, I put that at the top of my calendar every single day. Just deal with it. Because like you went through the hurdle in New York City, selling copiers in a competitive, cutthroat, no nonsense geography. It's the same thing with what we're dealing with today, whether it be sales, interviewing. What is the biggest problem you have? Whether it be a family issue, a personal issue, whatever that is, do that first thing.
Yep.
It's like that speech where the Navy SEAL said, make your bed every morning. It's that sense of accomplishment. And when you do the toughest thing right up front, it makes everything in the day easier. We don't regret those things. And I think great example, Manny, like you've got a great foundation. You've adapted to change. You've been able to be resilient, build rapport, do a lot of great things. I think there's a lot of lessons here, but I think we can continue this conversation. Like, I'd love to continue. I think we're coming down on our time frame here. I don't want to drag this out any further, but any other final thoughts we want to just add?
I think overall with interviewing, it's understandable that people get anxious. It's understandable that people get nervous, right? It's a big deal, especially if you're trying to get out of a bad job situation or one that you really don't like. And I just think the key is, or there are multiple keys, but make sure you're really, really well prepared. General Douglas MacArthur said, preparedness is key to success and victory. And if you think about what he accomplished in Europe in World War II, right? Make sure you've done all of your homework. Practice asking questions. It's dopey, but stand in front of a mirror, or today you can sit in front of a computer or do a selfie video and ask questions that you think you're going to ask in the interview. This way, it's not the first time you're asking them. I go into every interview with a printed sheet of questions. It shows the interviewer that I'm prepared. People don't mind if you refer to notes. And I think it shows that you are working hard to make that connection. And, at some point, like you said, it all boils down to, have I built the rapport? Have I made the connection? And does the person I'm talking to understand I am there to help solve their problem? I am there to help them get a win. And I think if you go into it with that attitude, at the very least, you'll have success, and they'll say, wow, he was a really good candidate, or she was a really good candidate. not the right fit here. We'd love to have him or her back. Yes, if we have another opening that fits their skill set. And I think if you do that, you'll be a lot more comfortable in the long run.
Agreed. Like you made a lot of great points there. Like a lot of great points. I think that's important. I had someone yesterday approach me that I spoke with about, they wanted me to help them. They were an executive, a seasoned executive, and they came to me and said, okay, I'm having issues trying to land job offers. The first question I asked them, and I said, how many interviews have you done? What's the industry you're targeting? And the first question I asked them is, okay, why would anyone want to hire you? Okay. Pretty direct question, but it kind of shows to me, I want to see how prepared they are from an interview standpoint, from a message standpoint, and the confidence in themselves. They couldn't answer that question, Manny. Like it threw them right flat on the floor.
That's bad.
It's bad, but the truth is that's most people. Like we're used to answering, what's your biggest weakness? What's your biggest strength? Like the softball, old school things you've prepared for, but where's the value you bring to a company? Because that's what they care about. Like
100%. What value does Scott Statson bring? What value does Manny Rodriguez bring?
Yeah. And I had to soften it down. After that, they were just dumbfounded. They didn't know how to answer the question. Like, practice an elevator pitch, but it all boils down to being prepared. And don't be afraid to go through the Manny, get the daylights beat out of you in New York City. Like that's what made you who you are today. And I'm not saying that everybody is going to thrive in that environment, but from an interview, from a career standpoint, deal with the hard things up front. In an interview, they're going to ask you tough questions. It's going to be difficult. In the sales industry, you're going to have people say no to you. Like, how do you respond to that? It's not what's thrown at you. It's how do you respond to that situation that makes you either successful, wanted, offer stage. And it's not one secret. Like you said, this isn't a secret. It's listening. I mean, there's a big package of things you need to know. But I think, Manny, and really, this has been great time. We've talked about things that I think offer a lot of value. I think the conversation can continue on a lot of subjects. And I like the idea of adding other people to it because I like to hear other perspectives. Like I certainly don't know everything. I only know a little bit and I'm usually wrong about that most of the time. So I appreciate the perspective. Thank you for the insight. This has been helpful. And I want to continue the conversation with other topics and maybe add other people to the mix in this.
Sounds great. I'm super appreciative that you invited me to join. This was really fun. And if anybody who is watching or listening wants to connect on LinkedIn, I'm the only Manny Rodriguez III with an S in Rodriguez on the entire platform. So I should be pretty easy to find, or, I'll be glad to answer questions or help make connections if you need them. Scott, thank you so much. And I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Excellent. Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Manny. I appreciate it. And everybody have a great day and rest of the week.
Take care.